Rice Creek Watershed District. Certainly want to welcome you to the Ramsey, Washington Judicial Ditch 1 presentation, this informational meeting. Welcome, John. We're just getting started. I do note at this meeting, our district, watershed district managers are present. We have President Patricia Preiner and Manager Steve Wagaman from Anoka County. We have Manager John Waller from Washington County. And also from Ramsey County, we have Manager Marcy Wynant and Manager Michael Bradley. So I'm happy to have them with us for this presentation. Garrett, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So why have we invited you here? The district established these informational meetings as a method to communicate on the public drainage system. Certainly, we want to inform you about what a public drainage system is, the responsibilities that exist for the system, and then some of the history behind it. Certainly, we want to hear from you as well. You may have knowledge or concerns about the system, and that is certainly part of our process to gain this public input. We hope to address your questions that you may have. I'll note that we have included time at the end of the presentation for your comments and inquiries, and we are happy to address them then. Garrett? Thank you. So now on the screen is Ramsey, Washington Judicial Ditch 1, what we call RWJD1. That's a fancy acronym for the ditch itself. On the screen is an outline of the drainage area for the ditch, or the sub-watershed. That is a amoeba-shaped outline of the ditch. For those of you that can see it, it is in blue. All the waters in that area, surface waters in that area, have a common element in that they all outlet eventually through the ditch system. That ditch system, RWJD1, is located in the southwest corner of the screen. It's Garrett, if you have a mouse capability there. It's the aqua-colored kind of fishhook shaped ditch system. That is an open ditch in the landscape that conveys water out to Bald Eagle Lake. The outlet, it is an outlet for at least 7 named lakes, and it is in multiple counties as well as multiple cities. Thank you, Garrett. So how did these public drainage systems come about, and why were they constructed? Well, on about the turn of the century, folks were in a fight with water. They were looking to address flooding concerns they had. They were looking to increase the value and productivity of the land. That might have been either through construction, of structures, or for a crop, or maybe pasture land in these types of uses. They also had concern for the diseases that were prevalent at the time, such as malaria, and the thought to control the spread of these diseases. They act as, to address this, they created outlets for the surface water. And these were regional efforts because there's multiple landowners involved, a great number of landowners, as well as, like I noted, they cross the county property line or political boundary as well as the cities. The citizens or the landowners at the time requested that the public drainage system be established. That was by what's called petition, and they were requesting for the ditch to be established on the landscape. That request went to the Drainage Authority. Initially, that would have been likely county government. that served as the authority and dealt with the petition. Today, the drainage authority for Ramsey, Washington Judicial Ditch 1 is Rice Creek Watershed District. And now we'll tell you a little bit more about Rice Creek itself. On the screen at this time is a general map of Rice Creek Watershed District. It spans from down in Falcon Heights all the way up to Columbus, Minnesota, and from Forest Lake down to Birchwood Village and Willarine. It's quite an extensive area, and the district, Rice Creek, serves as the drainage authority throughout this entire area. In the district, there are approximately 120 miles of ditch and tile that makes up the public drainage system. Just so you know, a tile line is an underground collection system. Historically, it was clay pipe segments that were laid end to end, and at that butted joint at the end, the water would seep in and then convey off the landscape. Today, it's typically plastic pipe with slits within it. But whether it's tile or open ditch, they are an established public drainage system that the district has an obligation to inspect and maintain. This is one of the district's roles. It does have other roles and responsibilities, such as flood control and water quality. On the screen now, Garrett has highlighted the location of where Ramsey, Washington Judicial Ditch 1 is located for us. And the public drainage system, specifically this one, is primarily today's topic for our meeting. Certainly, if you have other matters that you'd like to contact the district about, that's great. We'll be happy to find someone to discuss issues with you. So the role of the district as the drainage authority is in part here, just what we're doing to address the people joining this meeting. It is a public drainage system, so it is owned by the people, the landowners along the system, including you good folks. The district as drainage authority manages the system on behalf of those landowners. But the drainage is not free. The landowners that originally petitioned for the system to be put in place, they were assessed on their property for the establishment of the ditch system. And that is an ongoing cost of fulfilling those obligations to inspect and maintain the system. There are any number of activities that may take place in the system. Some of those are covered by ad valorem dollars, meaning the greater district, but some that are specific to the drainage area. So the district must work to balance the needs of all the users that utilize the system. Next slide, Garrett. Thank you. So how does the district manage these systems? On the screen now, there's a list of many of the things that we do, from inspection to projects and public meetings and repair plans in coordination with other regulating entities of the system. There's many duties that the district must undertake in its obligation, starting with that inspection to identify any concerns in function and moving through processes, which are typically statutorily defined, that the district has to follow to complete those obligations on the system. The district does have a team of folks who are well acquainted with public drainage, including the district engineer for the district, which is Houston Engineering. And Garrett, who has been working on the slides here, is going to take the rest of the program. He is with Houston Engineering and deals with many of our drainage systems. So Garrett, if you'd like to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. As Nick was mentioning, the district is responsible for managing the drainage system on behalf of the landowners. And one of the most common ways that they do that is through the maintenance and inspection and then also subsequent repairs that come from inspections. And there's a timing process that happens when a repair needs to occur. And oftentimes we lay it out in these 4 simple steps. And we are at the very beginning of this process. That does not mean that there's a petition to repair or that a repair is underway, but rather that the district, in the efforts to be effectively managing their drainage systems, has been doing systematically, going through their drainage systems and completing these reviews so that they have a full understanding, or as full as possible understanding, of what the scope of these drainage systems are and how to respond to any kind of request for maintenance or any other issues that pop up along the public drainage system. So we're talking about this first process tonight primarily, looking at the historic record of the public drainage system so that we can do a record review and reestablish the record of the public drainage system as needed. So what we're doing here is looking at what the public drainage system actually is, what its scope and cross-section and all these things are, and I'll talk about that in greater detail in a little bit. Once we have the records of what the public drainage system is, then the drainage authority is aware of what the scope of their authority is, meaning the extent at the upstream end, or what the drainage system can be legally without some other proceedings to do a repair. So typically after a drainage system is known, if a repair petition comes in or a repair is needed after inspection, the district will take a look at what needs to happen and try and decide, how does this need to be funded? Is this part of regular maintenance, or is this a larger repair type project? Now that distinction is something that the drainage authority makes on their own. Repair and maintenance, if you go to statute, are the same thing, but the district in their authority exercises in kind of these 2 worlds of, is this a small fix or is this something that's going to be a bigger cost to the public? And they have operating budgets to address maintenance, and then they have repairs that they complete on public drainage systems where we go through this full process. So once they're deciding what's warranted by this drainage system and its condition, then they'll do that repair report, where now we're in a whole nother proceedings or action where there's a report prepared beyond what we're talking about tonight, addressing concerns on the public drainage system. And then eventually you move into construction plans and permitting, and then something is built. The reason I want to lay all that out is, if you have a concern on the ditch, please bring it to the district and recognize that there is a process that the district goes through when addressing these requests. And based on the scope of the project or what the concern is, there may be a substantial amount of time that it takes to address those needs. But there is a known process, so be rest assured that when you bring a complaint forward or a concern forward, the district is very good at addressing those. Typically, these processes take at least a year for each step. So if we're starting from an unknown drainage system and we need to get to a tip to tail repair, a full-blown system repair, this could take 4 years to make that happen, just for a frame of reference. It varies based on the system, but that's a general rule of thumb. So the purpose of what we call a record review or historical review of the public drainage system is, we need to take a look at what's happened to the drainage system since it was established. Like Nick was talking about, way back at the turn of the century, a group of landowners petitioned the county, said, we want a public drainage system, manage it on our behalves, charge us a levy and we'll pay for it, but we need this outlet. And then over time, different proceedings can occur, or different actions on the drainage system that change the scope of what that drainage system is. And it's important to understand the history of the drainage system to arrive at what we call the as constructed and subsequently improved condition. So we're basically saying, how was it built, as constructed, and what's happened to it? How was it subsequently improved, and what's its condition? And then once the district has established that as constructed and subsequently improved condition, that helps inform their decision-making process for everything moving forward. it acts as a baseline, because once you're restoring something to that as constructed condition and subsequently improved, that is considered a repair. However, landowners can also petition for something greater than a repair called an improvement, and that's a whole nother ball of wax, a lot of other regulatory considerations and statutory obligations. So it's really laying the foundation for how the district approaches their decision making when considering actions on a public drainage system. During the process, when we review the records, we also complete a field survey. And our recent inspection and survey does show that extensive repairs are needed along this public drainage system. And the Rice Creek Watershed District Board has added it to their prioritized list of systems to be repaired. So a little bit of history on the system is it was established via that petition process in 1909. So this is a very old drainage system. Many drainage systems in the area are this old, but it's important to note that they have been around a long time, and they have, if you will, a lot of power that goes with them in that, and a lot of obligation. There's a whole section of statute about it if you like some really exciting reading. The system itself has a main trunk. There are no branches. It's 2 miles of open channel, and the Rice Creek Watershed District had its jurisdiction conveyed to it in 1973. Prior to that, it was managed by a joint drainage board between Ramsey and Washington counties. That's why it is the Ramsey-Washington Judicial Ditch. At the time of establishment, there was a benefited area that then changed a little bit in 1922 through an improvement, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And when they have these benefited areas, those are considered the landowners who have a benefit from the public drainage system existing. The public drainage system acts as an outlet to those lands and provides the opportunity maybe for a different land use than what would normally be there, or allows for accelerated drainage is another word we'll use. Basically, the water has a place to go because of the ditch. It ultimately goes through the drainage system. So way back when, I believe 1922 is the one we're referencing here. Those purple shaded squares, those are the parcels that were deemed to be originally benefited areas. Now, Nick was also talking about this blue line. That is the drainage area that drains ultimately to the drainage system. So you can see this is a system that has a very large drainage area, like Nick was stating, several cities, multiple named lakes. It's quite large for the small stature of the drainage system itself. The current alignment is this full fishhook extent all the way up to County Road 7, ultimately outletting into Bald Eagle Lake. At the time of design, the drainage system actually ended right here near the outlet of Schuneman Marsh. But in 1922, an improvement occurred, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, that extended the public drainage system all the way up to Highway 7. Now, if you're familiar with this area, you may be saying, hey, wait a second. I know for a fact that channel continues north of here. And that's why this process is so important, is oftentimes private drainage or other drainage practices may continue upstream of or be tributary to public drainage systems. And that's where it's important for the district to understand what is the extent of the drainage system that was petitioned for and established and considered when all these proceedings took place, as that is the extent of the drainage system that the drainage authority has jurisdiction over and what they can take action on within their powers that are granted by Minnesota statute. Some of the system modifications that have happened over its lifespan. I guess in 1924, it was improved in 24. The process began in 22. And that's where I mentioned that the drainage system was extended to the north up to the Highway 7. In 1995, the repair occurred for a downstream portion of the drainage system with some reshaping, where the bottom of the channel was reshaped to be a 4-foot bottom, and the side slopes were laid back to a 2-to-1. And that occurred from Taylor Avenue all the way up to Portland Avenue. or generally this area within this red box. In 2003, the district completed some downstream modifications to enhance water quality to Bald Eagle Lake. Some inline ponds were constructed, and a fish barrier was constructed as well. And that was actually recently replaced just this last year. So those are some of the water quality initiatives that the district exercised under their different hat with a water quality perspective, as opposed to acting solely as a drainage authority. So one thing that we want to make sure we're highlighting is that the watershed district does wear several hats, one of which is drainage authority over RWJD1. But you may see the district active in the area for a number of other activities, particularly these water quality initiatives as well. When we completed our review, we documented some of the current conditions of the public drainage system. When we look at the downstream end here, this is where that fish barrier was being constructed. You can see there the channel is relatively open. That is a very old, very cool culvert. If you want to go take a little walk and see this arch culvert that I believe is going under Highway 61. As we move upstream a little further, we get towards where these inline ponds are, and you can see vegetation can be a real problem for public drainage systems, as it can very quickly gather around culverts, plug them up, and cause a tailwater condition, backing water upstream. And then you can also see in this lower area, as we get into the residential area, the channel itself is heavily vegetated. This can be of concern for a number of reasons. Number one, of course, vegetation can be within the channel itself and slowing down water, can be causing blockages, little dams, if you will. Vegetation within the channel also changes what's the Manning's coefficient, or hydraulic roughness, or basically how easy the water gets through. It's a lot easier to put water through a clean pipe than it is to put it through a sponge. So vegetation can be a real concern in that way. But then vegetation can also be a concern from the aspect of access, not only for inspection, so that Ashley can do her job and get along the drainage system and see what condition it's in. But then also, once inspection's completed, to be able to get in there with any type of equipment to complete maintenance or repairs. Say there's a beaver dam that's been constructed. How are you going to get a track hoe in there or some other small excavator piece of equipment to remove that dam if you can't access the drainage system? So that's one of the things that, particularly on this system, of concern. You can see there's a lot of dense vegetation along the drainage system. Now we go up towards kind of the middle of the system near Portland Avenue. Again, we have a lot of vegetation, and also underneath the surface of the water, a bunch of accumulated sediment and other debris as well that gathers at the inlet of the culvert and then blocks within the culvert itself as well, reducing its capacity. And if you're familiar with the Portland Avenue area, I'm sure you're very familiar with standing water near that culvert. Can be a recurring issue when you have lots of source of debris and sediment within the area. And then as we get up closer to Schuneman Marsh, you can see the channel going through the vegetation here. A little bit of, aquatic plants or algae, if you will, can sometimes be indicative of maybe some stagnant water from blockages. But again, highlighting the fact that the drainage system does go through differing areas, right? So we've seen access that might be limited from heavy vegetation, such as trees and shrubbery and brush and all that. And then also the consideration of access through wet areas, where if the water elevation is elevated, or if it's a wetland or a marsh or things like that, making sure the district can access along the drainage system within those other areas as well. Some of the problem areas that we identified in our field review of the drainage system was the persistent flooding of the upstream end of Portland Avenue, and that the pipe is partially blocked, unable to get a grade route all the way down to the invert of the culvert, showing that it does have blockages, and that capacity is reduced beyond what it's intended to be and what it was restored to be during the 95 repair. And then, of course, the deadfalls and heavy vegetation and sedimentation in other portions of the channel. when you look at the profiles, which is, a nice line on a piece of what looks like graphene paper with a bunch of humps all over it. We plot both the existing profile of the drainage system, where the top of the ditch bottom is right now, and then this line representing the as constructed and subsequently improved condition. And there's areas where there's as much as 3 feet of sediment above the legal ditch bottom, where that much sediment has accumulated over the years. An important component of the drainage system that's important for the district to manage, as well as for landowners to be aware of, is that the public drainage system does have a right-of-way. And it's important that you're aware of that, because it's not one that it's not an easement necessarily that you're going to find recorded on your parcel if you do a query of your land with the county auditor or records keeping office. But as part of Minnesota statute, when at the time of establishment, an easement or an implied easement is granted in the way of right-of-way to the drainage authority to complete the actions of the drainage authority, including the area physically occupied by the ditch and the area adjacent to it that was required to construct the drainage system and then maintain it subsequently. And that's not just what it takes to get a 10-foot wide track hole through. It's the area that it's needed to place and then spread the spoils from the initial construction of the channel as well. So when we take a look at that and try to determine what it was, we take a look at the records as well as what's on the landscape, what's the channel depths, what are visible spoil areas. If you walk along the channel, there's this big hump next to it, or maybe even a gentle hill that looks man-made. What's the width of that? What's the volume of material that would have needed to be excavated to create that? If you spread it consistent with the project specifications, what footprint would that take on the landscape? And so we look at all those different factors and we come up with a determination of what the right-of-way of the drainage system is along its length. And like I said, it's an implied easement. It's not necessarily recorded on the parcel, but it is there, and it's there for the drainage authority or their designees to complete the actions of the drainage system, including that inspection, maintenance, repair. It's not, because it's a public drainage system and it's right away, does not mean that it's public right away and you can go hike along the whole thing and go across your neighbor's land. That's still trespassing. This is an easement or a right of way that's designated for the use of the drainage authority to complete the activities of the drainage authority. I will note that over here in this image, we have these various colors corresponding to the width of that right of way. That width is centered on the channel. So that's on both sides, an area that would have been used to spread spoils. So if you see your parcel in here, and this report is available on the district website, so you can take a closer look at this if you'd like. We have these numbers here of what the pins are. You can find your pin, match it to the number on the map. Whatever that corresponding color is along that length of the drainage system is what that right-of-way width is centered on the channel. It might be a critical piece of information for you to know, because the drainage system has been tagged for future repair. That is the area that the drainage authority will contemplate using in future repairs. So if you have concerns about things on your property that are within that area, just something to be aware of, and maybe engage in conversation with Ashley if you have any questions about that. Like I said, it'll be a long process potentially before that repair occurs. But this district's board is very proactive in communication and wants to hear from you what your concerns are and be cognizant of any important items or worries you have about what's on your landscape as the landowner.
Say, Garrett, for those that are on the phone, could you share what is the right-of-way width? It varies from...
Yeah, the right-of-way width varies from 55 feet all the way up to 105 feet. Now that 105 feet is pretty limited to the area near the inline ponds. I would say the lower portion is 70 feet or less, 55 feet down by the lake. Upstream of the ponds, it's about 70 feet. That Taylor to Portland area that was repaired with the 2-to-1 layback of slopes and things, that's where it's 85 feet. So if you're in that vicinity, it's about 85 feet. And then going upstream into the marsh, that's when we start to get to some 60 and 70 foot areas, and then back to 55 feet through Schuneman Marsh.
Thank you. And that's centered on the ditch itself.
Correct. So what's next? We talked a little bit about what the channel is, where it came from, what it's composed of, and how that an important part of that is the right-of-way. Next step after this meeting, this public informational meeting, is the district will be having a public hearing. And that public hearing will be held to correct the drainage system record to reflect the as constructed and subsequently improved condition of the drainage system as we've detailed in our report. Like I said, that report is available for review from the district website. The district as well will be continuing their routine inspection and maintenance program that has been ongoing and will continue into the future. And there will be future landowner engagement prior to repairs. So if you're sitting here tonight and you have maybe some concerns about what is a repair, what does that look like? What does that mean for me as a landowner? How does that happen on my land or my neighbor's land or within my community? There will be multiple additional opportunities to attend meetings and engage in the process through public hearings and additional informational meetings. Information is available from the Rice Creek Watershed District website. They have a mailing list where you can be alerted of upcoming meetings and things like that. So that's a great resource to join, so you can be part of that landowner engagement that will occur prior to future repairs. I just want to again highlight the fact that the district does wear several hats. So what we've been talking about tonight has been focused on the drainage authority perspective. But if you have other concerns around the water quality items or anything else that you're aware of in your area that's related to RWJD1 or even other conveyances, they are a watershed authority, so please bring those concerns as well to the district. They are not limited to their authority as a drainage authority. They do have many other hats that they wear. So then to close the evening, we'll have an opportunity for questions as well as you to provide additional information that you think might have been missed, or if you want to provide some context to an activity that you're aware of on the system. What we're looking for from you is, are we missing something related to the system that you think warrants being captured in the historical review report? And do you have any concerns or known issues that are associated with the public drainage system crossing your property? Especially if it's on your property that's a concern to you, we want to make sure that you are able to provide that input. If you have regional concerns, by all means, please provide those to Ashley as well. But particularly at the beginning, if you have a personal need, we want to hear from you. With that, I'll open it up to any questions that you may have.
So Garrett, as folks are maybe pondering what they might ask here, like you said, the Houston Engineering on behalf of the district did complete a memo or a report that looked at all the information that we found available at the recorder's office of the counties, as well as some physical examination on the landscape, and that's all put into the report to represent here it is. This is the best information available to date to represent the system. And so that report is available to folks, and we're happy to have you take a read. And I guess my thought would be, as Garrett kind of shared, don't worry about if you have a question later. You know, if you want to go on the website and take a look at that and read through it, we're certainly willing to field questions at a later time. But maybe someone has something they'd like to chat about now.
If I could ask a question, this is John Husing. I live on Bartilla Court.
Yes.
And we've worked with Ashley many times on the blockage under Portland. And as I understood it, although the watershed is responsible for the main stream, as we call it, the county is responsible for the culvert under Portland. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can address that question real quick. So crossings of the public drainage system are the responsibility of the crossing owner. So if you as a landowner have a private crossing like a, field approach or a bridge or a culvert to get across to maybe you have some land on the other side, that pipe and the crossing itself are your responsibility to maintain. And if you have questions about, to what capacity or grade that should be maintained, that's definitely something to engage the district with as a question. It's also important to note that the modification of the public drainage system, should you wish to either replace or install a crossing on the public drainage system, does require a Rice Creek Watershed District permit. So to make sure you're going through that process. But specifically regarding the road authorities, yeah, whoever the public road authority is, it is their responsibility to inspect and maintain and replace as necessary their culvert. Now, oftentimes, the drainage authority may engage in partnering activities or helpful conversation and be partners in efforts to have those culverts inspected and maintained. But the ultimate responsibility for a functioning crossing is the responsibility of the crossing owner. And in the case of a public roadway, that is the road authority.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask another question?
Please.
We used to live over on Spyglass Road. Basically, we used to say we were the last road in Washington County, and now we're the first road in Ramsey County. And we moved in 2005, and prior to that, Delwood Hills Golf Course would regularly flood. And there is definitely a water course that comes across out of Pine Tree Lake, across the golf course, and joins up in the middle of Schuneman Marsh. Now, is that kind of just ignored in all this?
So, if I could, this is Nick Tomczak, the administrator for Rice Creek. Your question blends in land use activity, and it also blends in floodplain or thoughts of floodplain in my mind. So when there are critical events, large rainfalls and such, it wouldn't be unusual for the water to exceed the banks of the ditch or flood a golf course and such. It's not unusual for the district to receive phone calls of that nature, and that is when Ashley or other staff from the district would go out and investigate to see if there's some sort of blockage or thing that needs to be addressed on the landscape.
I can add to that. This is Ashley, the acting public drainage inspector. I'm familiar with that area. The private drainage that comes in to the main trunk there from Pine Tree and the golf course would all be considered private drainage and not part of the legal public drainage system.
Okay,
Not
thank you.
Just not part of the legal, our legal drainage authority boundary.
Okay. Thank you.
And just to be clear, so on private drainage, much like the private crossings or the public crossings of the road authority, those are the responsibility of the owner or the creator, owner of the parcel that contains the drainage item.
But even though we have to deal with their water, because it does come through a ditch, right?
Yeah, I can maybe address that. This is Chris Otterness. I'm also with Houston Engineering. So when you're dealing with a private ditch, each section of that ditch is the private landowner's responsibility. And that's part of the issue with these private ditches, is that there is no entity that manages them. So it really ends up becoming an issue of one neighbor's interest over another neighbor's interest that may be downstream. And though the district empathizes with those concerns, there really isn't a whole lot that can be done when it isn't a function of the public. So in that regard, if you are having a concern about how, for instance, a neighbor is managing the ditch upstream or downstream of you, it's something that you'll have to coordinate with those landowners upstream or downstream of you. And again, you can have a discussion with the district about your concerns there, but there's really a limited ability on what the district can do other than provide what the district might have for information on how water moves in that area. And that's kind of really where the limit of the district's ability to engage in it are.
Thank you.
Other questions or thoughts?
Nick, this is John Waller. May I ask a question or two?
Of course, John. Yes, Manager Waller.
So, number one, is there an outlet for Pine Tree Lake? An official designated outlet? Sometimes there's been outlets in other lakes we've been involved with, and I'm thinking of Anika in this case.
Okay. I see Garrett and Ashley working on their computer screens to take a peek here. Did you find anything, Garrett or Ashley?
What I can comment on is we don't currently have a mapped district facility, which is what an outlet of a lake like that would be considered to be a known responsibility of the district.
Or of the city either, Garrett. It could be the city too, in that case, Grant. And my second question is, Chris, when the profile is finished and the complaints about the culvert size there at Portland, for example, maybe the other culverts also, oftentimes we found in the past that when these were first created, there was a bridge, and sometimes when they were later on, they put a culvert in there, and the culvert wasn't necessarily sized for the profile bottom of the ditch, the width. And I'm thinking of JD2 again, or on JD3, we had bridges put in. And if you put rectangular instead of circular culverts in, that seemed to give more capacity to it. Is that a possibility that would help with those blockages on those culverts?
Manager Waller, that's a good question. So, if they're at the time at which Ramsey County may consider doing a modification of that culvert, certainly we would want to be engaged with them. And Ramsey County has definitely been very good at engaging with us when they have a project such as that, where they would be working on that culvert. And then at that time, we could consider whether or not a resizing of that culvert may be needed in order to be able to provide the flow that would be expected of the ditch through that area. Short of that, if the county doesn't have that in their plans and it's something that's not imminent, then that could be would definitely be something we'd want to be looking at. Along with a repair report on the system, at that time that the rest of the system would be repaired. We'd certainly want to look at the sizing of every one of the culverts along the system in order to make sure that they're adequate to provide that capacity. And as you noted, there may be options to going to a box culvert. There may be the option of going with an arch culvert, which allow a greater flow at lower elevations, or it might be just a larger circular culvert, and would have to be weighed in, as how much flow is needed at certain elevations, and what are the cost implications, because it does add a significant amount of cost going to a box culvert compared to a comparable circular one. But certainly if it's required to maintain the efficiency of the system that was originally constructed, then that would be what would be needed.
Thank you very much, Chris and Garrett and Ashley. I have no more questions.
Thank you, Manager Waller. Anyone else have inquiry or comment? All right. So I think from here it would, while you folks are thinking, maybe something comes to mind. But again, that report is on the district website. If you'd like to place a call to us, I'm sure we can assist if you don't have web capability. Just reach out to the district office. Beyond that, this was an informational meeting, and we sent out a postcard so that you were aware of it. That is the method, along with postings in newspapers and on the website and such, by which we communicate. It's a statutory obligation, and we overly notice, I'll say. We go beyond the statutory requirements and try and be very transparent as to the activity that's going on. So please be attentive for those postcards and postings. And you'll see those in the future as we enter into the statutory process on the first step that Garrett noted, which is this records reestablishment.
I do see a hand up there. Who's controlling?
Oh, yes. Carol, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering if I could ask a question.
Certainly.
So I was just curious, is the first step just to kind of see what kind of what's there in the district, and then would the next step of this report, or is this report going to provide recommendations on how to change the drainage in Portland, or is there going to be another report for that?
Great question. So the intent of the record review or historical review that we just went through is to document what has happened to date, right? And then identify some problem areas, but it's not recommendations on what to change more so much as it is to identify what those areas are. So it would be a subsequent report, a repair report that was either, ordered by the Drainage Authority on their own based on an inspection, or a petitioned repair that brought about a report. And then during that process, we would go through what would repair alternatives be, and then hydraulic assessment of different opportunities, including the Portland Avenue culvert.
Thank you.
One thing I'll note too is that district staff have already had discussions with Ramsey County regarding this culvert, and so there's ongoing dialogue about what can be done and to address the known existing blockages in that area. But certainly that isn't going to be the end of the issue there, because as Garrett noted, there still is a significant hunk of sediment going all the way from Portland downstream that is also creating the issues in this area. So, while that might be one initial step is in addressing specifically what's occurring at Portland Avenue, certainly there's going to need to be additional work moving downstream in order to restore the capacity of the system.
Okay. Anyone else have a comment or question they'd like to ask?
I'd just like to add, John Husinger, again, how useful this meeting was, and thank you. We like to have some advocates on our side.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, wonderful. Appreciate the feedback. That's exactly what the Board of Managers for the district wanted to make sure was happening. That we had, I'll say, a somewhat informal atmosphere in which we could freely exchange things about the public drainage system. We move into a statutory process, and certainly that has formality to it as a matter of legal necessity, I'll say, but certainly we welcome your comments and interaction at that time as well.
If I could interject something here, this is Sterling Hintz. I'd like to thank the board, the commissioners for providing this. We just moved down into the area maybe, no, not a year ago even. And this is really informative, and I appreciate, my wife and I appreciate everything that you're doing. We'd like to learn all about what's going on, and this is great. I want to thank you, and I'm looking forward to more meetings like this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sterling. I see multiple smiling faces. So on behalf of the managers, thank you very much for the compliment. We look to hear from you again and stay engaged with the activity that's taking place.
Well, thank you. I will.
Very good.
Good.
All right, I get the feeling we might be at the end of the meeting unless we'll give it one more shot. Anyone else have a thought they'd like to share or a question? No, we got a thank you from Ramsey, Washington on the chat. Okay, looks like people might be ready to exit. I think I'm in the position of having.
Safe and healthy.
I'm sorry, pardon?
Everyone have a good night. Stay safe and healthy.
Yes, you as well, Sterling. Thank you much.
Okay.
Everyone take
Good
care.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.